Yeah, whatever. Listen, no one cares about this part. It all happened like 1,000 years ago anyways. This is all ancient history. Honestly, it's not even that original. So instead, I'm just gonna ignore all that. Let's talk about me instead. So way back when I grew up, on an altogether boring world of Troy 3 of the Londinium system, things were pretty tame. A normal, boring upbringing. I lived out a, pretty peaceful life. For a variety of reasons, I kinda never fit in that well. I was weird. Something was off about me. But hey, when you're the one who's out of place, where do you even start, am I right? Anyway, that was all well and good for the first bit. Then, whammo! The Galactic Civil War began. Of course, it took a little while to reach us. It took a little while for the worried faces and, the scarcity to really hit us hard. The lack of laser protein and plasma bread to really start to hit home. I spent most of my 10th year of life still unaware of the grand scale of what was about to happen. Trying not to think about all that. Focusing on, positron-based bionicles or something. But the dominoes were already falling. In the sky, lights shone. A real battle took place. Paris Station, which was like a moon in our otherwise moonless sky, was annihilated. The night sky was filled with shooting stars. The change had begun. Over the next weeks, people began to flee. Evacuation ships headed for the rim worlds or the outer colonies, trying just to get out. What came next was kind of a blur. One day, still the home I remember fondly now. Then chaos, uncertainty, puberty, and destruction. I was hurried onto a transport ship by my parents. That was the last time I ever saw them. The shuttle blasted a hole into the ocean. Usually, fusion torches of this magnitude were banned, radiating the world below in lethal light. But this was an emergency. In orbit, I could hardly be amazed at the joys of space when it was just another blur. The jump ship to the rim was crowded. People floated in the packed hallways, desperate to flee. We did our exit burn as the news came in of a Cobalt fleet pursuing a damaged Argonaut flotilla to Londinium system. As we waited by the jump point, behind a constellation of evac jump ships, a distant tapestry of lights blinked around my old homeworld. Another battle. So large this time, it made the one I saw from the surface seem like nothing. A small fleet of 30,000 Cobalt ships backed the damaged 7,000 Argonaut vessels in their flotilla into orbit of Troy. It was said that they used Troy's orbital shipyards as a shield to offset their numbers. Whatever happened, I and several others crowded around a tiny window view screen. Then there was a flash, brighter than anything I'd ever seen before. I don't know really the details. A self-destructing Titan machine, perhaps. Whatever it was, the last view of my homeworld was an eruption of furious orange light. Troy being split, shattered asunder. Next thing I knew, Londinium blurred behind the light cone of the jump ship's fold organ coming online, ripping us away. The adults had said we would be safe, that the worst was over, but they were wrong. Those who were waiting for us were there when we exited warp. In exactly what system and, what time and what place I could not tell you, but as soon as the jump ship's radiators opened up to cool the heat of warping, they were upon us. Glorks. Horrible space pirates from Dimension B SC2. 9 feet tall with 3 eyes and segmented. You have to understand, back then, with the patrols being so thin, the galaxy was in chaos. It was not odd that an evac ship or two would get jumped. They boarded the ship and began firing at the refugees, likely coming for the zero melange in the ship's jump organ, or the antimatter fuel perhaps. Whatever it was, I was taken by a crewman and thrown into an escape pod, only big enough for one occupant, and jettisoned into space. Just like with Troy, all I saw behind me was the flashing lights as the jump ship vanished into the distance. I felt alone, lost, sad, alive, and unsure of really anything. The pod had a hypersleep chamber, so I got in. I didn't know if anything would change. Would anyone care to save me? One more person lost in a massive world. All I wanted to do was dream and forget the pain of that loss. Try to remember my golden time. After that, the passage of things was really hard to say. Days turned into months, months turned into years. But I was awoken by the pod's systems. We were approaching something. At first it was like a black hole, but then it became like a wondrous billowing halo in the darkness of space. Only it wasn't a black hole. Oh, if it had been, how my story would have ended there. But no, it was strange, it changed shape. It was the giant pupil of this thing that turned and looked at me, and I looked back. The trajectory of the pod was caught in its orbit, but not to plunge in. No, it was caught perfectly in a stable elliptic. I was about to lose hope. I was about to give up. I would be caught here, my quiet beacon silenced by the deafening roar of the energies of this thing. But something odd happened. Something beautiful, and something terrible. You see, as I slept in my small world of the escape pod, as I grew close to the strange host, my soul, it began to stretch from my body. At first it was just a bit, a few centimeters, then a few meters. With every orbit I grew a little further, went a little further out, but then always coming back to my form. After many days and many orbits, at last it happened. I floated, in spirit form beyond the pod, and entered into the thing I now know to be some kind of portal. The world of dreams, the world of spirits, of fantasy and illusion, wonderful lies and beautiful twilight. What I saw was amazing. I forgot all the pain and sadness of the waking world. I saw stories, amazing stories, of giant mechanical heroes, of tragedy and of triumph. Awesome warriors, beautiful girls. I saw the wonders of the human imagination. Had this thing absorbed all these electromagnetic signals in space? Over the thousands of years it sat silently here. To be honest, I didn't really care. It was like the stuff beyond the edge of wonder. I learned, I felt, such sweet emotions. To be perfectly honest, it made living bearable. I don't really know how I could have endured as long as I have without its embrace. The substance of dreams. Sweet, merciful escape. It made me who I am, who I was, and more than likely who I will always be. But the more I watched, the more something deep began to change. I began to take note of the details of these illusions. Take note of the substance of dreams. In the back of my mind, a bitterness was growing. As wonderful as these things were, I was always painfully aware of their immateriality, of their lie of being. They touched on truths of the real, but they were not real. As much as I could desire them to be, they simply never were. Each cycle would then end with me returning to my small pod. Of course, I would always willingly go back, transport my spirit over and over, but the bitterness grew. In the end, fortune favored me, and in time a passing salvage ship saw my pod. The first real humans I had seen in years, including some... well, I won't get into that story, at least not quite yet. But needless to say, I returned with them to the world of the real. In many ways I was relieved, but instantly I was reminded of the harshness of the truth. In the real world, I was no one. I was just a weird but unimportant part of the grand scheme of things. I wasn't anyone in particular. I didn't look or really seem to be exceptionally major a player. For all my eccentricities and my seeming unique experience, I was drowned in an ocean of others just like me. No matter how strange I wasn't alone. And in not being alone, I was not special. But that harshness, in the face of it, I developed a hunger, an insatiable, starving need to tackle its ugly complexity. I wanted to understand it, even if I was not something important just yet. I studied history, politics, religion, military, science. Everything the normal people I lived around seemed bored by or uninterested in. I tore out the heart of the world itself. Reality would be the stuff of my consumption as much as the dreams that had been before. But in the face of that normality, something grew in the back of my mind. A bitterness. I would grow old, would die, people would repeat mistakes. Time did not wait, and all the while I was still no one of great importance. As true as the real world was, I was always painfully aware of its sad, impenetrable limits, of their absolute cruelty of being. I had no special powers. I had no great mechanical god to pilot. Real girls were hard to talk to at first. My plants, my beloved trees, and my animals grew old, grew weak, and left me behind. Reality was an undeniable and horrible thing for it. As much as I could desire the real to be amazing, and at times there were glimpses of it, overall it never was. That's when I found out the horrible truth. My soul had not come back with me. My body left the pod, but I could not bear to drag my spirit away from that wonderful twilight realm. I was filled with overwhelming despair. I had no idea what to do. After all, I had become a fractured thing, too fulfilled by dreams to give them up, but too aware of their lie, of being, to stay away from the absolute of the real. I wandered the streets at night. I watched others from a distance. I felt out of place. Went to parties, but was not really there. Spoke to people in the real world who had no idea of the wonders of dreams, or spoke to those so lost in dreams they were ignorant to the sins and the truths of the world. In the end, the only people I felt true companionship in was those like myself, twilight-blooded beings, those who I fell in love with, those who became my best friends. The more torn in two they were, the more I enjoyed their company. It eased the pain to know others struggled as I did, but the pain lingered. This was the depth of my despair. When at last it happened, I found out that I was not the first. The sky went red, the clouds parted, and they came. The giants of light, the white titans with glowing eyes of gold, the 4 heavenly kings. They hung in the sky above me and looked down and spoke. But what am I? How do I live with this? What have I become? But how do I do that? What do I do? Something came down from the clouds. It rested above my head and pulsed with hidden power in its light. The sky shook with thunder and lightning. The pen and the sword were in my hands. I understand, I cried out. I will not fail you. I see now what I must do, what I must become. As they faded into the sky, they spoke their final words to me. I had no idea then the road I would walk be so hard, a curse and a burden, as well as a blessing at once.